Maria was standing in her kitchen holding a bank statement that made absolutely no sense, reading the same line over and over, certain there had to be some kind of mistake. Her mortgage balance read 0. 3 months earlier, doctors had diagnosed her 8-year-old son Tommy with leukemia, and every single day since then had become a blur of hospital visits, treatment schedules, and bills that arrived faster than she could ever hope to pay them. She had fallen 2 months behind on her mortgage just trying to keep up with co-pays and gas money for the endless drives to the children's hospital. She had been bracing herself for a foreclosure notice, not this. She called the bank immediately, hands shaking, and a representative confirmed what she was seeing on the page. An anonymous donor had paid off her entire remaining mortgage balance in full, in cash, 3 days earlier. No name attached. No note. No explanation whatsoever. Maria sat down at her kitchen table and cried for the first time in weeks, not from grief this time, but from a confusion so overwhelming it felt almost identical to grief anyway. Who in the world would do something like this? And why? 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at the hospital addressed simply to Tommy's mom, containing enough grocery gift cards to cover a full month of meals, along with a small, handwritten note that read only, "You're doing better than you think you are." Maria stood in that hospital hallway holding the note, determined, for the first time, to find out exactly who was behind it. What she eventually discovered would completely change the way she understood the word stranger. Welcome to Digital Story Corner. Sit back, relax, and let's begin. Maria had been raising Tommy alone since his father left when Tommy was barely 2 years old, building a quiet, steady life for the two of them on her salary as a dental hygienist, never wealthy but always managing, always keeping their small house clean and their refrigerator stocked through careful budgeting and relentless determination. Tommy was a bright, curious kid who loved dinosaurs and terrible knock-knock jokes, the kind of child who made even exhausted hospital staff smile despite the circumstances that had brought him there. Maria had built her entire adult identity around being the steady one, the one who always figured it out, the one who never asked anyone for help. The diagnosis came after weeks of unexplained bruising and exhaustion that Maria had initially attributed to a growth spurt. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the doctor explained gently, treatable in most cases, but requiring months of aggressive chemotherapy and constant monitoring. Maria remembered gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles went white, forcing herself to stay calm for Tommy's sake while her entire world quietly collapsed inside her chest. The financial reality set in almost immediately. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs for Tommy's treatment were staggering, and Maria found herself picking up extra shifts whenever possible while simultaneously needing more time off to be at the hospital, an impossible contradiction that left her drowning within weeks. She had already sold her car, replacing it with an older, less reliable one just to free up cash, and had begun quietly skipping her own meals some days just to stretch the grocery budget further for Tommy. The mortgage payoff, followed by the grocery gift cards, felt like a lifeline thrown to her from somewhere she couldn't identify, and the not knowing began to eat at her almost as much as the financial stress had. She started asking around the hospital, gently questioning nurses and staff, wondering if perhaps a charity organization was responsible. Every person she asked seemed genuinely as confused as she was. It was a hospital volunteer coordinator, an older woman named Pam, who finally mentioned something in passing that caught Maria's attention. Pam casually noted that an elderly volunteer named Walter, who had been quietly visiting the pediatric oncology ward twice a week for nearly 15 years, always seemed to take a particular interest in new families, often disappearing for private conversations with parents that nobody quite understood the purpose of. Maria hadn't consciously registered him before, but suddenly she remembered an older man in a gray cardigan who had struck up a brief, kind conversation with her in the hospital cafeteria weeks earlier, asking gentle questions about Tommy and how she was holding up. Maria found Walter in the hospital's small volunteer break room the following week, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, and asked him directly, watching his expression carefully for any reaction. Walter's face changed almost immediately, a mixture of surprise and something that looked oddly like relief, as though part of him had actually been waiting for this exact confrontation. He admitted it immediately, without hesitation or excuse. Yes, it had been him. The mortgage. The gift cards. Several other anonymous contributions Maria hadn't even fully realized were connected yet, including a mysterious credit that had appeared on her hospital billing account the previous month. Maria, overwhelmed and confused in equal measure, asked him the only question that mattered. Why? Walter set down his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly, and told Maria a story he said he had only shared with a handful of people in his entire life. When Walter was 9 years old, growing up in a small coal mining town, his father died suddenly in a mine collapse, leaving his mother alone to raise 4 children with almost no income and no support system of any kind. Within a year, his mother developed a severe kidney infection that required expensive surgery the family could never have afforded, and Walter remembered vividly, even 70 years later, sitting in a hospital waiting room certain his mother was going to die simply because they didn't have enough money to save her. He remembered his older sister trying to keep the younger children distracted with a deck of cards in the corner of that waiting room, while he sat closest to the door, watching every doctor who walked past, terrified of what news they might eventually bring. Then, almost exactly the way it had happened for Maria, an anonymous benefactor stepped forward and paid for his mother's entire surgery in full, no name attached, no explanation given. His mother recovered completely, lived another 43 years, and neither she nor Walter ever discovered who had saved her life. Walter told Maria that he made a quiet promise to himself that day, as a frightened 9-year-old boy sitting in that hospital hallway, that if he ever grew up to have enough money to help someone else the exact same way, he would do it without hesitation, and he would never require any thanks in return. Walter had spent decades building a modest but successful hardware supply business, living simply despite his eventual wealth, and for the past 15 years had quietly used a significant portion of his savings to anonymously help struggling families he encountered specifically through his volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. Maria was, by his own count, the 11th family he had helped this way, though he admitted quietly that Tommy's situation had struck something particularly close to his own childhood memories. Maria sat across from Walter in that small break room, completely overwhelmed by the realization that a stranger's kindness toward a grieving 9-year-old boy 70 years earlier had somehow rippled all the way forward into saving her own family today. She reached across the table and took his trembling hand, unable to find words adequate enough for what she was feeling. Over the following months, as Tommy's treatment continued, Walter became something far more than an anonymous donor to their family. He visited regularly, bringing dinosaur books that made Tommy light up every single time, sitting patiently through long chemotherapy sessions just to keep Tommy company while Maria took brief, desperately needed breaks. He taught Tommy how to play checkers during the longest infusion days, letting him win just often enough to keep him motivated, and brought him a small toy excavator after Tommy mentioned once, offhandedly, that his father used to work construction before he left. Tommy began calling him Grandpa Walter without anyone ever suggesting it, a title Walter accepted with visible emotion every single time he heard it. Tommy's treatment was ultimately successful, and he was declared cancer-free just over a year after his initial diagnosis, ringing the traditional hospital bell that signals the end of chemotherapy while Maria and Walter stood together in the hallway, both of them crying without any embarrassment at all. Walter had brought a small dinosaur-shaped cake for the occasion, one he'd clearly ordered weeks in advance, certain even before the final test results came in that this day was coming. Maria eventually started a small non-profit foundation alongside Walter, dedicated specifically to anonymously covering financial burdens for families facing pediatric cancer treatment, funded partly by Walter's continued generosity and partly by donations from grateful families, like Maria herself, determined to keep the same quiet chain of kindness moving forward. They call it simply the 9-Year-Old Fund, a name only Walter and Maria fully understand the true meaning of. What Maria learned through all of it was something she now tells every new family she meets through the foundation. Sometimes the kindness that saves your life doesn't arrive with an explanation, and it doesn't need one. Sometimes it simply arrives quietly, decades in the making, started by someone who once needed exactly the same kind of saving themselves. If this story moved you, subscribe to Digital Story Corner and hit the bell a brand new story drops every single